2.
Good evening. I am calling the regular meeting of the University Place City Council for Monday, June 15th, 2020 to order. We are conducting our meeting remotely in compliance with the special Open Public Meeting Act rules issued by Governor Inslee's emergency order. City Clerk, can you please do the roll call?
Councilmember Figueroa.
Present.
Councilmember Keel.
Councilmember Keel is present.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Present.
Councilmember McCluskey.
I'm here.
Councilmember Fleming.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
You're muted, sir.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington present.
And Mayor Bellisi.
Mayor Bellisi is here. Before we begin our meeting, we have a few special rules I want to go over with everyone. The first is that there is no live public comment or public testimony for today. For the members of the public who are listening or joining us remotely, please recognize that you have had the opportunity and opportunity remains to submit your public comment via email. Comments received before 5:30 p.m. deadline today were electronically provided to the City Council for their consideration. Comments received after this deadline will be electronically provided to the City Council after the meeting. Secondly, for the City Council members, as with our previous remote meetings, we will continue to use the round robin method in the sequence showing in the speaking and voting chart our City Clerk has provided each of you to ensure orderliness in our meeting and that everyone has a chance to speak. And lastly, given the special circumstances, please also note that in the event of technical difficulties, all items on this agenda shall be carried over to the agenda for July 6, 2020 regular meeting. With that, may I ask Councilmember McCluskey to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
She's muted.
Thank you, Mayor Bellisi. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, I'm messing this up, under God and country. Okay, I'll start over again. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Thank you, Councilmember McCluskey. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as provided?
Yes, I move approval of the June 15th agenda.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, are there any objections to the agenda as submitted? Okay, hearing none, the agenda is approved unanimously. Our next item on the agenda is our public comment section. However, as of this evening, there were no public comments received. Therefore, you did not receive an email on that. Our next item is our consent agenda. May I call for a motion for approval or amendment of the consent agenda as noticed?
Yes, I move approval of the June 15th consent agenda.
I have a first. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a second. Are there any objections to the consent agenda as submitted? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved as submitted. Thank you very much. Our next item is council consideration. We have a staff report on the Paradise Pond right-of-way. May I ask our staff person, Jack Eklund, to please provide the report for us at this time?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. I'm Jack Eklund, Director of Engineering and Capital Projects. And tonight we're bringing to you for your consideration a resolution authorizing the transfer of park property to public right-of-way in order to accommodate the 67th Avenue Phase 1 project. Now this is the project that would improve provide sidewalks, curb gutter, landscaping, bike lanes, street lighting, driveway improvements, some new pavement overlay along 67th Avenue between Regents Boulevard and 40th Street. Now, although construction for this project is several years out, we have received secured federal grant funding for both the design of the project as well as the acquisition of needed right-of-way. Now, if we could bring up on the screen an exhibit that I have to show you the parcel in question. So one of the parcels that right-of-way needs to be acquired from is the Paradise Pond Park property. In order to accommodate the project improvements, a 5-foot strip of land, and you kind of see, it's a little tricky on the map, but you'll see there's a dimension about halfway in the middle of the deal, but a 5-foot strip of property is needed along the frontage of the park property. Now, the reason we're coming to you tonight, it seems a little bit ahead of the curve, but it has to do with the park properties relative to using federal funds on capital projects. And 23 CFR 774, which is an exciting read, requires a section 4F de minimis impact determination be conducted for any project that proposes to use park property to accommodate federal funded transportation facilities. Now, we have conducted that evaluation, and we've determined that the permanent impacts of this project would result in improved pedestrian and vehicular access to the park. The proposed sidewalks will provide safe, dedicated facilities for pedestrian walking to the park. Street lighting will improve the safety and visibilities for all park users, both motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians. In addition, the improved driveway entrance will provide increased sight distance and safety for motorists entering and exiting the park. Overall, the proposed improvements will have no negative impact on the park facilities. So, as you know, that park has walking trails, has a parking lot, but the area in which these improvements are being would need to be built are outside of that. It's really along an unimproved area right along the shoulder of the road. And this work will in no way limit future use of the park. I do want to point out that during construction, there would be some temporary impacts of the project that could result in restricted access to the park for short durations of time, particularly when the driveway improvements are constructed and the adjacent roadway is paved. However, it's anticipated this access restriction will have very minimal impacts on the overall park operation usage, and the park itself would be able to remain open during construction. We have this, the park right-of-way has been Director Gary Cooper, Parks and Public Works Director. He has reviewed this proposed park right-of-way transfer with the representative from the Parks and Recs Commission, and they have concurred that it is a de minimis impact, or basically would be an impact that would have little impact on the park itself. So that is the issue in a nutshell. I would like to mention that we have not received any some of the public comments that the mayor mentioned. We have not received any comments regarding this issue. However, the opportunity has been provided. And then other than that, I think I'd open it up for any questions. And then I would direct you to the council bill, or in your council packet, you will find both a council bill as well as the resolution that would authorize this to proceed when the time comes.
You're muted, Madam Mayor.
You're muted, Your Honor.
You're muted, Mayor.
Oh, sorry. I get on everybody else for being muted and I do the same. As is customary, we will be using the seating chart as we go through the first round of council comments here. First up is Councilmember Figueroa. Do you have any comments or questions for Mr. Eklund?
No, Mayor, but it's just a small comment. And Jacqueline, thank you for the early update. It's always nice to get ahead of the curve and understanding what's going on. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilmember Figueroa. Councilmember Keel, do you have any comments or questions at this time?
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing at this time.
Okay. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have any comments or questions?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, no, I have no questions. Thank you.
Councilmember McCluskey, do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Mayor. The only comment that I have, I think this is going to be a great addition to the aesthetic value of even going into the park with the trees lining the street and the accessibility and also the enhanced safety features. So thank you for getting the grant to do this. So kudos to you and your team once again.
Councilmember Fleming, do you have any comments or questions at this time?
I do, Madam Mayor, and Jack, thank you for the presentation, and likewise, this is a great project for the city in terms of enhancing the overall aesthetics, as one of the council members pointed out here. But be that as it may, I do have one question, Jack, and it's really for people who are watching, not so much for the council. And that is, someone may say, well, if the city owns the park property and the city owns that half of the street, why is it necessary to do this right-of-way acquisition for the street project?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So with the federal guide, since we're using federal transportation funds, we need to follow their process. And essentially, they've created a process more with the federal government in mind, but we're stuck with those same implications. So where the Federal Parks Department and the Federal Transportation Department may not talk to each other, they have it set up that anyone that's using federal funds for roadway projects can't, drive through the middle of, say, a national park without, due consideration. So we're under the same guidelines and same requirements, and so it really is checking a box for the federal requirements. And it does help ensure that we're not doing something that's a big impact, but obviously this would be an enhancement for the project.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have any comments or questions at this time?
Yes, Mayor Bellisi, I do. So, Jack, nice presentation. Appreciate that, and the staff report and the work that took to get it here, and jumping through the various hoops to make sure we're doing things right as we should, of course. I appreciate having the federal dollars here to help us, and if there's a few rules that come with it that make some sense, great. Certainly it looks like the project actually enhances the value of the park, providing access and a better setting, as has already been discussed. One other observation I had is looking at the amount of property that it's necessary for the park to give up to receive that benefit. It would appear to be a small fraction of the area of the park. It's less than 1%, or do you have any idea if that's a true statement or not? So the area that's needed is a relatively small amount, and fractionally, how much would you guesstimate that is in the park?
Yeah, it's a fraction of a percentage
Okay.
for sure. It was, and unfortunately, I could pull that up, but it's a very small percentage. It's about a 9.5 acre park, and we're looking at it was like 3,000 square feet, I think, or 5,000 square. So a very small percentage.
Great. Thank you. I asked that just because of, anyhow, thinking about what de minimis means.
Yeah.
It seems to meet that in all ways. So appreciate that information. Thank you.
Thank you, council members. My comments have been echoed already by our council members. As somebody who has walked on 67th Street, I can't wait to get sidewalks to make the whole walk easier, especially since Paradise and the other part on the other side, Adriana Hess, aren't connected, you are forced to walk along streets that currently do not have sidewalks on them. So this will definitely make it safer for the neighborhood and for individuals that walk throughout UP. So I'm looking forward to seeing this move forward and to provide some level of safety, not only for the residents, but for park goers too. So with that, are there any additional questions or comments from any of the council members at this time? Okay, not seeing any. This is on our agenda for council consideration. So at this time, I am asking, do we have a motion for consideration of the Paradise Pond Park right-of-way?
Yes, I move that we approve the request for use of Paradise Pond Park for the right-of-way of this road project.
Do I have a second at this time?
Yes, I second. Mayor.
Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Are there any additional comments or questions before we vote? Okay, not seeing any. Are there, may we please have roll call?
Councilmember Figueroa,
Councilmember Figueroa votes yes.
Councilmember Keel,
Councilmember Keel, aye.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee,
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, aye.
Councilmember McCluskey,
Councilmember McCluskey, aye.
Councilmember Fleming,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington,
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, aye.
Mayor Belisi.
Mayor Belisi, aye.
The motion passes, Mayor.
Thank you very much. At this time, thank you very much, Mr. Eklund.
Thank you.
At this time, our next item on the agenda is our city manager and council comments and reports. Mr. Sugg, may we have your city manager report at this time?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Back in April, as you recall, the City Council approved the final phase, the bid award for the final phase of Cirque Drive sidewalks from 83rd Avenue to Grandview Drive. This completes the multi-year effort to build out the curbs, gutters, sidewalks, and bike lanes along the corridor, extending all the way from Orchard Drive to Grandview Drive, a distance of approximately 3 miles. This final phase is funded by a $1.8 million federal grant and a $300,000 local match coming from the stormwater management program. The design of this project was done in-house by our in-house design team. The grant was secured by that same team, led by Jack Eklund. And now this final phase of Cirque Drive, which will begin construction next week, will be inspected by Jack's team of inspectors. And then our finance department, led by Leslie Blaisdell, will handle the grant reimbursement process. So it's a true team effort, all done in-house. It includes again, the inspection of sidewalks, street lighting, landscaping between Grandview Drive and 83rd Avenue. The contractor is active construction. Their plan is to begin on Monday, June 22nd. Construction will take approximately 6 months, which puts the completion around the end of this year, 2020. So that's my report, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Sugg. At this time, we are open for council comments. Councilmember Figueroa, do you have any comments at this time?
Thank you, Mayor. I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Keel, do you have any comments or questions or comments at this time? Sorry. You're muted, sir. You
after
are.
microphone on. Yes, I do have a brief comment. Thank you. So I just want to thank the organizers, participants, and actually our police for very peaceful protests, 2 of them that we had this last time, or the past 2 weeks. It's great to know that in our city, we can still talk about some tough issues where there's a lot of disagreement and still be civil. So that is a great thing. I do have a lot of things I could say about this topic, and I would think those of you that know me know that I've got a lot of background on a lot of sides of the issues, even beyond just what's obvious. But I hope that this council, Mayor, picks a venue, a time during our meeting that we can actually discuss how these topics impact us as a city, and what, if anything, we're going to do about it. I just, just to show a little bit of my hand, I'm not at all one that's in favor of defunding police like some people call for. I mean, I think, in my personal opinion, that's ridiculous. But I do think there are things that we can discuss, and hopefully we discuss as a council to get after the issue. It's been a long time coming. As a kid growing up in the 60s, I remember. So I hope this council will take the time to have that discussion, and I'll reserve the rest of my remarks for that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Keel. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have any comments at this time?
As Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, I have no comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember McCluskey, do you have comments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. The zoo is reopening on June 18th for a limited number of attendees, and they will take online tickets orders, which will have a stamped time of entry. So there'll be safety and health protocols established, but they're excited that they can open the doors and having some of the general public who is interested come through and visit the animals. And I'm sure the animals may be excited to see some extra life around their encampments. And on a more serious note, I'd like to echo Councilmember Keel's comments. I did appreciate the peaceful, thoughtful protests that came through University Place, and the cooperation of our police and our mayor being present there, as well as our mayor pro tem. I think that's very important that during these protests that we have people that are on the council, or especially the mayor, being present to show that we are concerned and we're engaged and we're there to learn and listen. And I am in Kent Keel's camp. I'm not in really favor of defunding the police. However, I would like to be a little more directive than Councilmember Keel is right now, because I am the child of the 60s too. I've been around lots of protests, lots of anarchy. I grew up around the Los Angeles area, and there's a little thing called Watts that happened. So I understand to the level that I'm able and capable to understand, and I like to have an open mind and learn more. So I would encourage our city to consider a proclamation initially, having a stance against systematic racial biases, and from there to establish a resolution to study in order to discover tacit as well as overt racial discrimination, along with active public input in the process. I don't believe government can resolve this on its own. Racial biases are inherent not only in government, but throughout our society. And I think it's time that we can have a little more compassion and understanding to help not our society heal and move forward, so that we can look at each other with equality, love, and understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember McCluskey. Councilmember Fleming, do you have any comments at this time?
I do, Madam Mayor, and thank you. I likewise thank Councilmember Keel for bringing this topic up today. Difficult topic, and it's tragic that it took a really tragic event to put this in the forefront of not just that local community, but the nation and the world. And I do join Councilmember McCluskey and calling for not only the proclamation, but also to echo Councilmember Keel's comment of the citizens of our community deserves more conversation on this topic. You know, I was grateful for the peaceful protests. It was not the end of a statement, but I think the beginning, and it opens the door for more dialogue and really demands and calls for more dialogue. And as city leaders, I think we owe it to not only ourselves, but we owe it to the people of our community to keep that dialogue going. On another note, about a week ago, our city also took the time to celebrate and honor the graduates of 2020. And I think it's a good opportunity again to shout out to those graduates. They unfortunately didn't get the luxury of having the traditional type of graduation, but I think the citizens of our community did the best they could by turning out to honor their parade. And again, just to remind everyone that we do have some awesome young men and women who are going off to college, and they will do great things as they move ahead in their lives. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fleming. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have any comments at this time?
I do. Thank you, Mayor Bellisi. Appreciate that. And Councilmember Fleming, appreciate you mentioning the graduate parade. It was a neat event and just a whole lot of fun. And as you got a chance to see these folks that were kind of caught up in this odd point of time with how we deal with daily life and amongst the coronavirus issues, this was a great solution. And I had a lot of pleasure in seeing their faces as they went through there. That was great to be part of. Another activity that was great to be part of in this last week was on June 4th, along with Mayor Bellisi and Councilmember Keel, being part of passing out personal protection devices, essentially masks and thermometers for Pierce County businesses. But our county executive, with the help of his economic development department, Bruce Dannemeyer, had put together a series of help for local businesses and around the county, had a distribution of those types of equipment I mentioned, masks and thermometers for each business that signed up ahead of time. And we were invited to be part of that. I stepped in and lent a hand for a while and enjoyed seeing what really was over 100 businesses, and many of them from here in University Place, and certainly all of them throughout the county. We had the help of the economic development staff, both with the county and with our own staff, part of that. And it was also a good event to be part of, and knowing that there was some help to help get our businesses ready to open. Joining with my other council members this evening, as was mentioned, I, along with Mayor Bellisi, did attend on the 6th, that Friday, a series of demonstrations that started in Cirque Park, and we walked with them to Market Square. And in Market Square, we heard many impassioned, many important, and many very real statements about what's happening in our country and in our communities today. It was a time, I believe, for us as elected officials to listen. And that's what I did, and I believe that's what the mayor did as well. And with my fellow council members tonight, also want to ask that we move as a group examine this issue, let folks know what we're going to intend to do about it, and then do the things that we say we will. And I know with this council that we will. But it's certainly time for us to spend the energy and the resources that we have that are available to help us find a better way to end the injustices that our citizens in our community and around the United States endure. So with that, if it's a proclamation and a resulting resolution, please, I'd like to be part of that. Thank you, Mayor, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Well, I think my 6 fellow council members pretty well covered the recent major national event, so I won't belabor that point. What I will say is that I have been in discussion with our public safety chair, Ed Wood, as well as staff and our police chief, and we are looking to have a public forum, hopefully sometime in the end of July, when we get into phase 3, where we're permitted to meet with more than just 5 people in a room and be able to invite the community in for discussion on issues and concerns that they have, so we can move this issue forward and onto our agenda. It makes it difficult to conduct a team meeting about such a heartfelt issue, and so the feeling is that, you know, our Public Safety Commission is an excellent commission to help facilitate that conversation, so that we as council members can attend to listen and learn what the exact issues are in our community that we need to personally be dealing with at this time moving forward. So hopefully, keep your fingers crossed, the governor will allow us to go into our phase 3 in the beginning of July so that we can get this meeting underway. I have committed to using my meetup with the mayor the first Saturday and Tuesday of each month. Hopefully, if we get open by July 1st, I can have my meetup with the mayor that following weekend and be available to allow citizens to come in and express their viewpoints and ideas to us also. So let's look forward to that. With that, I don't have any additional comments or concern or information to share with anybody, as you guys pretty well covered all the bases for me, so I appreciate that very much. Thank you. With that, our next item is our study session on the 2019 and 2020 biennial budget carry forward adjustments, and we have the pleasure of having our finance department manager here, Leslie Blaisdell, who will provide us with her staff report. So, Ms. Blaisdell.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Leslie Blaisdell, Finance Director, and we'll get the presentation slides up for you. So before you for tonight's study session is the 2019-2020 carry forward budget adjustment. The adjustments recognize the carry forward of funding from the 2019 budget for reappropriation in 2020. The reappropriation is comprised primarily of beginning fund balance adjustments, capital improvement projects carry forwards, internal service fund carry forwards, and new and continuing grant funding. Notwithstanding the changes, the city's financial position overall, as reflected in the financial forecast, has not materially changed. Go to the next slide. The adjustment does not include any reductions to revenues or expenses related to the COVID-19 pandemic. The majority of impacted revenues are received on a 2-month delay, so we do not yet know the total effect to the city. Initial estimates of reduced revenues are at approximately $1.1 million. We're estimating that we'll see impacts to sales tax, real estate excise tax, fuel tax, field rentals, admissions tax, and gambling tax. We recognize that we have incomplete information at this point, and that additional information will come over the next couple of months. In particular, sales tax receipts are delayed by 2 months, and the governor has extended sales tax reporting for 2 additional months. So there's a delay on some of those funds. Department heads have identified cuts in expenditures of approximately $1.5 million that they will be managing down to. Cuts lists include cuts to travel and training, professional services, city events, summer temp help, reduced park and right-of-way irrigation, and elimination of the landscape contract. The city manager has indicated that we will make additional adjustments as needed or requested by City Council. We will be reviewing all expenditures in September as part of the 2021-2022 budget process. The most significant change you will note is in our restricted and CIP funds. The change is mostly reflective of carry forwards in revenues and expenditures in the parks, public works, and municipal CIP, and the related interfund transfers that come from the various restricted funds, surface water management, real estate excise tax. Please note that appropriations for capital improvements are continuing in nature and do not lapse at the end of the year. When we budget these for the biennial budget, the projects are budgeted in full in the first year of the budget, and then what is remaining to be spent to complete the projects is carried forward to the second year of the budget. In Public Works, we're carrying forward previously budgeted projects into 2020 for Public Works CIP totaling approximately $11.9 million. In the Park CIP fund, we're carrying forward previously budgeted expenditures for the Chambers Creek Trail project. There's also a reduction to revenue in this fund for this project, as the grant is a multi-jurisdictional grant with Pierce County and Lakewood, and the initial indication was that University Place would be the lead agency on that grant, so the grant funds were budgeted in our budget. But when all was said and done, Pierce County was the lead agency, so they will receive that money first. The other significant budgetary changes are identified below. On the revenue side, on the general fund, we are increasing the franchise fees for water and electric by $178,145. These revenues, we know exactly what they're going to be. The franchise fees for those two are both based on the 2019 gross revenues. So that increase will be received. We have those figures. We are decreasing utility tax projections by $78,669. That is a decrease to cable, phone, and cellular, and it's offset by a slight increase in solid waste. We have an increase to the state shared revenues in the amount of $125,495. The majority of that is for city assistance. At the time the budget was put together, there was no guarantee we would get any city assistance. The most recent figures indicate that we should get about $100,000. We are adding the CARES Act funding grant in the amount of $992,700 and an increase in the street fund for sewer franchise fees in the amount of $28,558. The development services revenues include an increase of $91,526 for a Department of Housing grant. Police and Public Safety has some new grant funding in the amount of $6,041. That is for some Washington Traffic Safety Commission, impaired driving and distracted driving grants. We are decreasing the animal license fee projections by $12,545 and decreasing the SRO reimbursement in the amount of $66,438. As you recall, there is a change to how that's being handled that will be covered by the school district come September, so we're adjusting those estimates. The remaining revenue adjustments in the budget are interfund transfers, mostly related to CIP project carry forwards and debt service, and then adjustments to beginning fund balances based on final numbers we have for 2019. On the expenditure side, in addition to the changes in Parks CIP, Public Works, and Municipal CIP outlined above, because all of those revenues have an offsetting expense for the project, excluding interfund transfers, we propose expenditure projection changes in the general fund of about $1,399,000. The major changes in that fund include the addition of the expenditure side of the CARES Act funding, carry forward of capital restricted monies in UPTV in the amount of $147,985, and the carry forward of contingency funds in the amount of $279,706. That's equal to about 2% of our operating budget that we keep in contingency in case of emergencies. And then there are some reductions to departmental contributions to risk and property management. The risk management invoices came in lower than our projections made 2 years ago, so we are reducing that. In the street fund, we see expenditure reduction in the amount of $625,800 to the pavement maintenance budget due to the projected loss of TBD funding. And we propose increasing expenditure projections in development services fund overall by $78,543. That's the expenses related to the Department of Commerce housing grant and some carry forward of some restricted tree account funds of $4,500. We propose carrying forward 2019 expenditures for use in 2020 in the internal service fund overall by $578,597. Most changes are IT related for hardware replacement, which was pushed from 2019 to 2020. The financial forecast has been updated to include all the carry forward adjustments. All existing services and legal and contractual obligations can be met with existing revenues through the forecast period. And a public hearing on these adjustments is scheduled for the July 2nd, 2020 council meeting. So that concludes my report, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Blaisdell. At this time, we'll go through our seating chart for any council comments or questions. Councilmember Figueroa, do you have any comments or questions at this time?
Leslie, just one small one, and thank you for the report. What is $1,000 for distracted driving, and how can you use that money for so-called distracted driving?
The Washington Traffic Safety Commission grants typically pay for officer overtime for emphasis related issues for distracted driving or the impaired driving.
Okay, was your question answered, Councilmember Figueroa?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Councilmember Keel, do you have any questions at this time?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I do. Leslie, thank you for the report. The question I have is the same question I asked during the Finance Committee meeting, and so I don't expect this is going to be a big surprise, but with all the finances and the trouble that governments all over the country now are facing with COVID and the cuts and things like that, and I know that your report really takes into that in consideration, but I didn't hear where the focus where we're really trying to talk about what we think we're going to see in the future and how we're going to walk through this over the next year, looking at numbers and adjusting and looking at numbers and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we are constantly looking at the numbers. Each month when the revenues come in, I go through those and we compare them to prior months. I've sat in on several webinars with other finance professionals because everyone's in the same boat we are. No one's quite sure exactly how this is going to impact us. There are certain revenues that come directly to us, for instance, admissions tax or gambling tax, and those I can project a little easier because I know exactly what we're used to getting. Items like sales tax, it's still up in the air. We currently have numbers through March, and we were only in lockdown for 2 weeks. So at the end of this month, we'll have figures for April, which is a full month, which we'll be able to use those to project out a little more and see how we're impacted. We know we'll lose some sales tax from businesses that are closed, but we're not exactly sure how much we may make up from online sales where the sales tax now comes to us. And so it's a juggling act some days, trying to go through these numbers and figure out where we're going to be. But all the department heads have really buckled down and are looking at their budgets and watching their budgets very carefully. Many aren't spending a whole lot of money until we know exactly where we're at and whether we're going to need additional cuts or whether the ones we've identified will be enough.
Great, thank you. I appreciate, again, your report, and I can appreciate all of the up in the air process things are right now. And so we just appreciate the work that you're doing, and we look forward to staying in step with you as you give us new numbers and we can readjust and adjust again. So thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have any comments or questions at this time? Please be aware you are muted.
Yes, I have a question. Leslie, thanks a lot for the great presentation. The REIT monies are our major source of matching funds for the parks projects, I believe. If we see any dramatic downturn in REIT monies, is this going to adversely affect our ability to receive these grants from the state?
It could. Right now, for parks projects, parks impact fees pays about half of a project amount. The other half has to come from another source. Typically, that's REIT monies. If it's if it applies to that grant, we can also use general fund monies. But we do have. I always leave some money in REIT after the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. We don't budget out all of our REIT monies. We leave a cushion there so that the current year and next year aren't significantly impacted and we have time to adjust.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember McCluskey, do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be surprised if the REIT money has really tanked a lot from what I'm hearing out in the real estate fields. And I'm interested in how the sales taxes will be impacted with all the online sales. And so I think that will help cushion us. I'm hopeful in that funding category. I know my online sales at home has ticked up quite a bit, and as well as some of the honeydew lists that we got ticked off here. So hopefully the sales tax will be won't be as depressed as we initially had anticipated it to be. And I will look forward to see what the numbers are, because right now our numbers look pretty rosy, pretty good. So it'll be interesting just to see how COVID has impacted us and how we can manage our finances moving forward. And I'd like to thank you for your leadership in this approach, and as well as you're looking ahead with cautionary notes in a very conservative manner. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fleming, do you have a comment or question at this time?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Leslie, likewise, thank you again for a great report. Most of my questions, in fact, all my questions were answered during the Finance Committee, but I just want to say for the record, as Councilmember McCloskey has stated, while things look great in the first quarter, I am concerned about the results for second quarter. I was pleased that you mentioned during the Finance Committee that some of the losses in commercial sales or retail sales that you would see in the brick and mortar stores were maybe offset by some of the online sales that have occurred. I don't know how much of an offset that will be, but nonetheless, I'm still bracing for the results of the second quarter and looking to see how, as a city, we'll mitigate that delta, whatever it may be. So I'll wait and we'll see. But thank you again.
Thank you, Councilmember Fleming. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have any comments or questions at this time?
A comment, Mayor Pelosi. Thank you. And along with Councilmember Fleming, I'm also appreciative of the work that's gone in here on the report. And looking a little bit to this murky future with some trepidation about what it might be, I think we're doing what we can do to brace for an unknown that no one can quantify for us quite yet. And when we get that opportunity, we'll know better how to navigate it. But as you mentioned, Leslie, the department heads, with the direction of our City Manager Sugg, are holding the line on expenses and underspending from their authority, and I very much appreciate that. So that does give us some, hopefully, the flexibility we need to match our expense to revenue and not have to play catch-up ball too much here when we finally get hard numbers that we can understand what's happening. So with all of that, I appreciate the efforts with the others. Thank you.
I would like to thank you, Ms. Blaisdell, for your fine report, and I'd like to thank staff for being ahead of the game as far as the COVID-19 situation. I, along with a number of my council members, do feel that the true financial situation is going to come up in the next quarter, and despite the rosy picture for the first quarter, we may have some major decisions to make that we are not going to want to make, but have to make for the sake of being able to balance our budget. So I would like to just caution our citizens into understanding that this past 3 months of lockdown has and will impact budgets moving forward. Hopefully not as dramatically as we look to since we all do over conservative budgeting process. I'd like to keep an element of hopefulness out there that it won't be that dramatic, but at least we are taking the approach and assuming that it will be. And I appreciate that and appreciate staff getting on top of it fast. I understand this will be coming forward in a future agenda for consideration, so be prepared at that time for it, and Mayor Pro Tem and I will work on getting that scheduled as soon as possible. So thank you very much, Ms. Blaisdell. Our next item on the agenda features our city attorney. He is going to be providing us with information on council rules. As a reminder, we did discuss some of these items at our January retreat, which seems like it was forever ago. And we've just now been able to bring it back onto our agenda. So with that, Mr. Kaiser, please go for it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Matt Kaiser, City Attorney. And I appreciate the lead-in because you kind of took a lot of the words out of my mouth. Back during the January retreat, as part of council's annual process of reviewing the council rules, council had identified 3 broad areas for which there was consensus to amend the council rules. The first one, and interestingly enough, they're all in the same rule. The first area addressed council member absences. The second went to address for the situation of a council member pro tem, and the third addressed remote participation. Due to the COVID emergency back in March, council took the remote participation rule separately and has already implemented that, and that's been a part of the council rules now for the better part of the last 2.5, 3 months or thereabouts. So which brings us back just to those first 2, which is addressing council member absences, as well as the circumstances under which would trigger a council member pro tem appointment. At the January retreat, council identified sort of a broad consensus, which we've attempted to incorporate within the language of the draft rules, which are included in your packet tonight. Under the circumstances where you would be dealing with vacancies, or absences, let me just talk about absences first.
council had expressed sort of a more streamlined process to address council member absences. Our current process requires a vote at the outset of every meeting. Council had expressed a desire, hey, if I'm going to be absent, let somebody know, and then the clerk during roll call can announce that. Proposed language has been submitted that council members of the council could simply notify the mayor, the manager, or the city clerk that they would be absent during roll call. The clerk would just simply identify that member as excused in that circumstance. For those situations where a council member was not able to get a hold of one of those three individuals, there'd still be the necessity of a vote to either excuse or not excuse, as the case may be, that absent council member, and that language is incorporated in the draft rule which you have before you tonight. The second piece is addressing the circumstances on Councilmember Pro Tem. As council knows, I believe last year was the first time in city history that council had the opportunity to address the circumstance or potential circumstance under which you may address where a Councilmember Pro Tem appointment may be. I'm seeing that the mayor is signaling no, it may have occurred one other prior time. But it suffices to say it's a fairly rare and fairly seldom occurred event. And so the question is, okay, at what point is that trigger? And the trigger under state law is that when you have an extended illness or extended absence, that council may appoint a council member pro tem. And so the question for council is, at what point do you want to have that discussion? One situation is fairly obvious, which is where the council member knows in advance that they may be suffering from an extended absence. It might be due to military call-up duties. It might be that they're going in for extended surgery, that sort of thing. And it would place the burden on that would-be absent council member to identify, to say, hey, I'm going to be absent, let's have that discussion. The second circumstance is where you have a council member who's been absent for an extended period of time. How long is too long? And the draft rule that has been drafted, and this is just simply a starting point for discussion, would put that trigger date at about 120 days of a combination of excused and unexcused absences. And I'm not highly wedded to this date. I wanted to throw it out there mostly for council discussion. And part of the reason why that date list is chosen as a starting point is, as the members of the council know, who underwent the process, it's a fairly involved process, and it's not a decision that you undertake lightly. So where does a short-term absence turn into a long-term absence that generates the need for that? And trying to pick a date, at least just to get the discussion ball rolling for council, that you sort of draw that mix. So those are the two rule changes which remain from the January retreat, which are still on the council's docket for discussion. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that members of the council may have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kaiser, for your report. At this time, we will be using the seating chart for council comments or questions. Councilmember Figueroa, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Matt, as far as the 6 month or 120 days mentioned, I'm going to assume that there's state statutes that allow us to do that. So it's wide open as to whatever we decide is kind of a blank check for us to decide what we want to do. There's no statutes in place that will prohibit us from picking a mayor pro tem at any time and point. But most essence important would be that no matter what we do, the current council member that may be, now you use excused and unexcused all in one sentence, but I believe that as long as they're excused, that they would stay as a council member, just like council member Grassley has. If they're unexcused, then it becomes by law a different issue. They get, for better words, bumped out of the council. So I want to separate that thought because you used it in the same sentence. And so I think we need to talk about excused absences when we pick a mayor pro tem, and unexcused, well, that's an automatic. Well, not automatic that we go to mayor pro tem. It's still another discussion whether we want to pick a mayor, a council pro tem member to replace someone that has been unexcused and is no longer on the council.
Yeah, Council has broad flexibility on if that circumstance for a council member pro tem appointment is true. So it could be 30 days, it could be 120 days, it could be one meeting, you know, you could make, but the question for council is when are you willing to draw that combination? And part of the decision in terms, or part of the part identified is the combination of excused and unexcused. That is intentional. And it's intentional for a reason, is that with 3 unexcused absences for regular council meetings, the office is being forfeit by operation of law. So you have 2 just hypothetically, if you have 2 unexcused absences and then the 3rd meeting is excused, you now reset that clock. So trying to come up with an easy to understand rule just to kind of accomplish where the council is coming from. When do you want to have a discussion without overcomplicating the rule? That's the recommendation I'd like to see before you tonight comes in.
So Mayor and council members, I think it's not as simple as picking 60 days or excuse me, 120 days or whatever. It's also about factors that includes budget. You know, the budget, we may say we really need to have that 7th council member as soon as possible after 3 months, after 2 months, or so. At the same time, whatever we do there, and I'm fine, is that it has to have some kind of a protection clause that we don't pass an ordinance that we shall, no matter what the budget looks like. If the budget can't handle the extra payment, especially if the council member is excused and still on the payroll, and we're adding another council member, and I think that we need to make sure that we weigh that in, the budget side of it. Thank you.
Council Member Keel, do you have any comments at this time?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I do. I appreciate Councilmember Figueroa's discussion about budget, and I do think that needs to be part of the consideration. I too don't want to write a rule that has us locked in that may not want to be locked into. And I appreciate that. That feedback is funny. I don't.
We're really having an issue here.
Can everybody mute their mics that are not speaking at this time?
Let's try that. No, I still got it. So I'll try to power through this. So I just don't want us to get locked into something that that we don't want to be locked into. The other thing too, the point about the excused and unexcused, I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. If there's 3 unexcused absences by law, that means the person just abdicated the position. So we don't have to do a council member pro tem at that point in time. They're done, and we can go appoint another council member, not council member pro tem, but council member. So we don't have that budget problem, right? Because under the 3 unexcused by law, they've abandoned the position. So there's that piece. I am though, Matt, concerned about the 2 absences, unexcused, and then the 3rd one is an excused. I mean, that could happen. I mean, it could happen. I mean, we just need to be thoughtful about that, because the 3rd time when you get excused, it could be for a legitimate reason, and so that's the downside of the rule. But we're all elected. I mean, no rule is going to be perfect, and that would be the downside. So I don't like combining the 2, because then it really gives a heavy hand to, you know, puts the council member at a disadvantage, is what I want to say about that. Other than that, I think this rule is very difficult because, as you guys know, I mean, you know, I was agonizing over how to do it and what to do right and stuff like that. And so the last piece I would say is every situation is different, okay, when it comes to this whole deal. And so the piece that we went through was very unique in my feeling. And so there were a lot of different things that we had to consider when we went through this. So I hope that we don't have rules that are just hard and fast, that don't allow you to take the human dynamics into what we do. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, you may unmute your mic. Do you have any comments at this time?
Yes, I do. Matt, can the council appoint a city council member, or does it have to be a temporary?
I don't know if you guys can hear me. I've been having issues with the mute button. You're looking at an employment process in one of two circumstances. The first is when the position is vacant, whether that's the 3 unexcused in a row, the individual dies in office, they resign, something along those lines, and then an appointment can be made. There's a question, obviously, what is the length of the appointment, but they can make the appointment to fill that vacant position. The second is the situation which you're familiar with, which is the appointment of a council member pro tem to serve during the extended absence or disability of a sitting council member whose absence is necessarily excused by virtue of that appointment. And I think the thing that otherwise remember about this rule, at least the draft rule language that's being brought forward tonight, is that it simply triggers when do you want to have the discussion. It doesn't say anything beyond that. It's when should we talk about it? That's all that the language of the rule is trying to get to. And it may be that after reconsideration, council says we don't want to have something in the rules. That's a council level decision.
Thank you. Thank you. I would say I concur with Council Member Keel in that I think we don't want to box ourselves into a corner where we're forced to make a decision that maybe we don't want to. So I don't. I guess I'm going to just pass on this one. I guess I would lean towards the excused, unexcused option where you would have the choice. You know, if it's unexcused, I think it's pretty obvious then that there's something wrong. If it's excused, then it's excused. Also, I think that the voters voted the person in to represent them, and they, during this period of time, are not getting the representation that they expected and that they're actually paying for. So I think I would, in this case here, side more with Councilmember Keel's comments and be careful about boxing us into a situation that we don't want. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. Councilmember McCluskey, do you have any questions at this time?
Thank you, Mayor. I do. In regards to the excused and unexcused, according to state law, you know, there's 3 unexcused absences, and they can vacate the position. So in the example you used, Matt, of the 2 unexcused and then an excused, the excused comes at really council prerogative. And so I think the cards in that case is in the council's hand to understand the reason why. So for example, if the council member doesn't have the courtesy, or even having someone close to the council member let another council member know, especially the mayor, then I'm suspect as to what's really going on and why he or she can't do their fiduciary duties on the city council where we need them to be. So as you have written the absentees, I am in favor of that, but I also like to have the first call out to go to the mayor for any excused absences. And outside of that, if they can't get a hold of the mayor for whatever reason, having a city council member, there's 6 other of us out there that they should be able to call at least one of us to bring it to the dais to let them know that it is an excused absence. I don't think that's, in my opinion, in most cases, that hard to do. In the council pro tem, I don't like to be hard and fast, as Councilmember Keel alluded to. I think it all depends upon sometimes the reason why. If they're out for about 60 days, I think there's a courtesy to the council to kind of let us know and give a reasonable assumption of possibly when they will return. In lieu of that, if they're unable to give a return date, maybe the 120 days could be another benchmark, and then the council, bring it to the council to decide on whether to move on a pro tem at that time or not. It all, as Councilmember Figueroa indicated, it all depends upon our budget, looking at the budgetary impacts to that. But to me, both of these situations aligns to communication and respect, and to give each one of us some consideration, because we don't know what is actually, what our life holds in store for us. And possibly even after 120 days, we would still like to have that council seat open, because of the reason being, and being compassionate and hopeful that the council member could at some time in the near future come back. Hopefully I'm not too wishy-washy, but I think I think we need to be sensitive. As Councilmember Lee indicated, they were voted into their seat by the citizens of University Place, and there's expectations that the citizens have. And I'm sure the citizens would like us to be compassionate in regards to our decision when we go forward with if we have to have a pro tem or replace the council member. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember McCluskey. Councilmember Fleming, do you have any comments at this time?
I do, Madam Mayor, and thank you. No, this is without a doubt a difficult conversation to have, only from the standpoint that individuals that are involved are typically very close to us, since we work together as council members. From a historical perspective, this is more for Matt, there's actually been, prior to the current situation we find ourselves, 3 historical situations we had with the council, of which 3 of those were medically related. 1 was military duty that the council had to deal with. You know, we talk about removal of electeds from office. I'll tell you from experience at the county level, when we had to remove or made the attempt, I should say, to remove an elected, It's not as clear cut. It's not as easy as the law would tend to lead us to believe. It is a very, very onerous process, and it can take up to years to remove an elected from office. So just tuck that in the back of our heads, because sometimes we just look at the law and go 3 unexcused absence, they're out. The law may say that, but the process of enacting that can be quite a challenge. I tend to lean towards the earlier comments made by several council members, and that is when we start talking about date certains, we really start tying the hands of the council to do what they believe is in the best interest of the council in the city, based on the circumstances at the time that involves that particular council member. I wish I could look into a crystal ball and be predictive of what's going to happen to any of us at any given time, but we just don't have that luxury. So I think leaving the latitude and the wisdom to the council to make that decision of what event or what situation or what timeline triggers the conversation, I think for the most part as council members, we can make that decision. We're smart enough to do that. Now, lastly, what we haven't talked about, but I'd like to put on the table for conversation, instead of looking at dates in which we have to take actions, is more look at a process, because what really drove us to where we are right now, as I understand it, was really a lack of communication. And perhaps we may want to have more of a conversation of formalizing a line of communication or a process by which whichever council member it may be that is going to be extended absence from council, to have that line of communication established with the mayor and the council, and have gates in which those lines of updates are provided to the council. So that would help guide the council in triggering the conversation of when do you put a pro tem in, or what other actions may be appropriate at that time. So those are my comments, my recommendations, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Council Member Fleming. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have any comments at this time?
I do. I see that Councilmember Keel has his hand up. I would, I'll go ahead and make my comments, and then he can take his turn as the mayor sees fit. With that, Matt, I have sort of a series of questions for you. Let's see how this works with the audio equipment. To begin with, the law lays out how a council member gets removed with 3 absences, and that's not for us to change. It's going to be there whether or not we have a council rule. So that's just the world we're in, as I would see it. As far as the council pro tem issue goes, the proposal would be, I know it could be any date. We have 120 days, but let's say it's 120 days for right now for a discussion. At 120 days, we have a discussion as a council if we are ready to bring a pro tem in. But we could also say, gosh, I'm not ready today, but if this continues for another 60 days, I think we should. And council members can make their decision as a group as to if they wait 60 days, do something immediately, or just say, no, I don't think it's ever going to happen. The budget doesn't allow us to do that. Doesn't give us enough money to do it. And so we just can't afford to do this. Let's not do this time. There's nothing that compels us to take action one way or the other. It's saying, let's have a discussion. Is that right?
That is correct. It's simply, let's have a discussion. And part of that is, in listening to some comments, and I'll throw this out there, is do you believe that you need to have a rule at which point you believe it's appropriate to have a discussion? The draft rule that's in front of you says 120 days, and in your hypothetical, you say, not today, let's talk about it in 60 days. You could do that. You could do that with this rule. You could do that without this rule. But the question at the end of the day is the council rules are for the convenience of the council. What do you as the council best with? Do you think you need the rule or not? At the retreat, council signaled, let's have a rule. And so this is when you want to presumptively have that conversation.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, good. So that's still up to council what they do and when they do it. And you just said that if we wanted to do it 60 days, even though if the rule said it's 120, but we had, we'll make this up, it's a hypothetical. We have 2 council members that are called up for active duty as reservists. They're gone off the council. We have a 3rd council member that suddenly is taken ill. That means we have 4 members. Everyone has to show, everybody possible has to show for a quorum. And that all happened in 45 days.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have to wait for 120 days to say we need a pro tem. Is that right? Go ahead.
That is correct. I'm having some mute issues on my end, but that is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So if there's something is emergent, we can deal with it still early, but at least there's something at a certain time point, whenever it is that we decide as a group, that causes us to say, yeah, it's a hard discussion. I've been trying not to face it, but I don't have enough information, as much information as I need to face it properly, but we're going to have to figure it out anyway. So, and that's, I think, probably to the long-term benefit. Since we can move it further, or we can take it earlier as we choose. Okay, those are, and the budget issue that I think is a legitimate issue, that when we have that discussion, we can consider the budget, and we'll have the details in front of us then. Communication is a challenge and at the heart of our recent experiences. And we hope that Communication Respect will be there to make sure we all have the information we need, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be there when push comes to shove. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Before I go into the second round, I'll add my comments to the mix here. The 120 days was as a result of us not feeling comfortable in discussing the long-term absence of Council Member Grassi. And so we had discussed in January about the need to at least have something in writing that would force us as a council member to look at those situations, not necessarily make a determination, but at least to address it and look at the situation that was at hand to see if we needed to move forward with either finding a pro tem or what, because we waited for almost a year before we did anything, and the only reason we waited was because of our personal involvement and feelings for Council Member Grassi. So I think we need to have some date certain in which it forces council to look at the situation that we might be facing, or that the council might be facing at that time, with a council member that is not in attendance at the meeting for whatever reason that might be. It does not require us to make a decision at that time. It just requires us to evaluate the situation. And that's why the rule is there. So I'm in favor of putting some sort of timeline on it for us to address it. The excused and unexcused was because we did not have a real formal process in our rules that to inform council and inform staff, our city clerk, for record keeping purposes, what was there. I know for the entire time I've been on council, we have voted as a council for excused and for excused absences, when in reality we didn't know what we were excusing the person for. In particular, Mr. Grassi, while he is ill, that we had no formal acknowledgement of his long-term illness and what have you, and we continue to excuse his absence, which put us into a predicament where we had no choice but to find a council member pro tem, instead of possibly looking at it from a different angle and engaging with his family sooner. To find out what kind of situation we were dealing with. I myself am uncomfortable with voting on excused or unexcused absences if I'm not sure what the process is, or why a council member's there. It's not to say I need to know the details, but at least the rules spell out that the council person that wants to miss a meeting has to contact the mayor or the city clerk with their excuse, and that's all that's needed for me to feel comfortable that at least that chain of command or that process was followed. And so when I make my vote as a council member, I can say, yes, there was a legitimate reason for this person to be absent. So that is why we're putting those in the rules based on our discussions that we had in January, as far as my memory serves me on that. So those are my comments. I understand that Council Member Keel had a follow-up question or comment to be made. Council Member Keel.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Everything you just went through, I agree with, and I think that that's what we talked about as my recollection and the reasons for all that stuff. I'm very much comfortable now with the 120 days, now that I know that it's just a time for us to begin the discussion. What I was concerned about when I first heard it was that it locked us into actually having to make the decision. But now with the understanding that no, we have to have the conversation and we could make the decision not to do anything at that time, I'm much more comfortable with that. Because again, I would say every situation is different, and there's this human dynamic that goes along with what we're talking about. And we have to have the flexibility to take all those things into consideration. So I'm good with the rule now, as I understand it, because it doesn't box us in, but it does make us at least put it in front of our face to make a decision one way or the other. So thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Keel. Council Member Figueroa, you had your hands up. Additional comments?
Thank you, Mayor. After listening to everybody, it appears that we already have everything in place. We have the choice to bring up the issue of a absence, is excuse or not, already anytime, 120 days, 60 days, whatever the case may be. I don't think that was the issue with this council in reference to our recent situation. That was a conversation we were having all the time, and it wasn't about that. And it certainly wasn't about not having in place. We already have in place about the 3 unexcused absences if somebody doesn't call in. Okay, we decided not to enforce it, and so what are you going to place another similar policy that says the same thing, and it's about enforcement? We already have that policy. I think that what we need to work with, and I agree with Councilmember Stan Fleming, is the process. The communication was the issue. There was no communication, and it was a very sensitive, what we could just know about or hear about, to the point that we didn't allow for the policies in place to take hold. The policies in place of being excused or unexcused for not reporting in, and or communicating with someone within the council or the city manager or the city clerk. And the other issue is that we didn't take action because, and we had discussed this, we decided not to take action and let it go and let it go. So it was on us. So you put 120 days and we say, well, no, not now. And a matter of fact, if we have to, I don't think that this will prohibit us looking at this sooner, even if we had a policy of 120 days. So I think that what we have in place is there. What we're talking about is redundancy that is all about implementation and following the policies that we do have. And I believe what needs to be refined and be clarified would be the communication and the stronghold is say, hey, if you're not going to, and this gets into also Councilmember McCluskey, if somebody doesn't have, I don't care what they're at, everybody has some way to communicate through a loved one, through an attorney, somehow or another, somebody has the ability to get back to the council and report and provide some information to be able to be excused. And I think that it was us, it was this council that we didn't want, we waffled. Sorry about that, but we did. We didn't want to make the hard decision because we didn't have a policy in place about, if you don't communicate, no matter what this, and if you don't, let's say, for example, okay, let's say you weren't able to tell someone that you couldn't make that meeting, but I will say 100% of the time, shortly after that, you can communicate with somebody who said, hey, I had this emergency. You know, we've done it. I just happened not too long ago with my water heater. But I called and I texted one of our council members and told them, okay, I know that there's been other situations where somebody was on the road and they couldn't get on the phone. We've had those instances, but you report it. So even if you can't make it for that one evening right before our meeting or prior to that, you certainly, I know there's enough time. If the process says you must communicate within 48 hours after the fact, preferably before that. But if you don't have it, if you don't communicate at all, then, and on top of that, we were trying to reach out to this council member with no response. That's even further, I think, further damage, where you're not even responding to anyone from the council or the administration saying of your absence. I think that's the process that Councilmember Tim Fleming is talking about, not to put words in you from you, sir, but I think that's what we're talking about here in general. And I think that it gets to the case of Councilmember McCluskey, but somebody needs to be, we need to be responsible. And if we give the flexibility to say, you need to do it before or soon after that, and if we don't do it, and if we reach out, let's even go that far. We'll even reach out to you and there's no response, and we're going to make it unexcused, period. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Figueroa. Is there anybody else on council that has additional comments or questions at this time? Okay, not seeing any, I will assume that this is ready to move forward at a future council meeting for consideration. And we'll have an opportunity at that time to discuss it and ask questions again. So, Councilmember Figueroa.
Well, I'm not sure why you're putting forward to come back, because I think there was some. I'm getting some feedback here. There are some issues whether we really need a timeline set or not. I was hearing other things there, so I like to summarize coming back. And is that the consensus of this, you know, of this discussion?
Any other council comments in regards to that question? Councilmember Keel.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think Councilman Figueroa is right. There is some, at least I'm picking up some difference of opinion, and so I think it'd be time. It's good to get it clear to figure out what we want staff to bring back to us. I would say on the situation that we just went through, the one thing I would disagree with Councilman Figueroa on is that it wasn't a waffle. At least I've you know, at least not on my part. I haven't been called a waffler in a long time, but it had more to do with the fact that I understood what was going on. Okay, I mean, it wasn't that you know, we didn't know. We knew the man was sick, still very ill, and incapable, so of being here, and so it was known. But we were right that when we decided to address and say how long, then that's where the communications piece broke down. We didn't get a lot of information. But I would say that even though if we have a process, even after the process is gone through, we still have to have some action, and so the process is, yeah, that's great and wonderful, but we still have to have at least some guidelines as to how we want to act. And that's why I came back the second time and said, I really like now that I understand what the rule is about, I like it because it just gives us a framework of a jumping off point. Whereas before, when we were going through this, and I was mayor at the time, there was no framework, and so it was okay. The man's absent. We know why he's absent. We're not talking. When do we do it? I mean, how do I do it? There's a whole bunch of human dynamics. We love Councilmember Grassley. How do we deal with all that? And there was nothing that really spoke to that, other than if there are 3 absences, then they're removed, and unexcused absences, and then they're removed. But we were excusing them every time.
Mm-hmm.
So then it was a question like, okay, so are we gonna vote to not excuse him? Okay, all right, and then we're gonna vote to not excuse him 3 times in a row? And that's what I'm talking about, the human dynamic of all this stuff. So we need to have the flexibility, and I like the rule the way that it is now, because it does give us that flexibility. 120 days. Okay, now we have to have a conversation, and we could say, hey, because of what it is, we don't want to deal with it. Or we could say, yeah, we do want to deal with it. So I understand what you're saying about it's redundant, but sometimes it, we need it. So I like it. So that's my comment.
Are there any other council comments? Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would tend to, not tend, I do agree with the comments that Councilmember Figueroa noted. We have a process in place. I would presume that we are, and don't take this as a derogatory comment, but just in the vein in which it's presented, we're big boys and girls. We can make decisions that are appropriate when they need to be. I don't think we need a rule that tells you need to think at 120 days. I think what we have is a process that says, as a council, depending on the situation, could be 30 days, could be 60 days, could be 120 days. We already have a process that says at any given time, we can make a decision whether we need to put a council member pro tem in place or remove a council member. I don't think we need to have a rule that says that 120 days you must have a conversation. I just think that's utter nonsense. But be that as it may, and without getting into HIPAA issues, I do agree with the comment made by someone a few minutes ago that said the gist of the issue that got us to where we are right now is we do not have in place a process by which we require council members to communicate with council when there is a change in condition. That's what's lacking from our rules of engagement on the council. It's not when we start to have conversations. We all know when we need to have conversations. It's a matter of when is a council member really required? I mean, we know common sense would dictate, but other things happen to come up where that may or may not preclude that. But we need to look at having a process in place in which at certain windows, be it 30 days, be it 60 days, 120 days, I don't care, but have gates in which council members or their designated representative communicates with the council as to what the situation is, so you can move not you, but we can move swiftly in making the appropriate decision that's in the best interest of the city. So I don't think this is ready for prime time. I do believe it needs more review or more conversation, but I think we're missing the target when we start trying to wrap a date around it versus setting a process or a system in place by which the communication and the information is provided council in a timely manner.
Okay, are there any other comments from council at this time? Seeing none, this goes back to the drawing board, it sounds like. There is no consensus at this point. The conversation we're having right now, I will tell you, is the same conversation we had in January. Yes, it's 6 months later, but because we can't even be decisive on whether or not we have a process in place for selecting a mayor pro tem and a date certain where we actually force ourselves to view it was part of the issue. It took us so long to get a pro tem position moved forward. So I'm just going to tell you, I don't know that we're going to get anywhere closer to making a decision if we can't even acknowledge that we don't want to step on anybody's toes here. So I think the mayor pro tem and I will go and meet with staff and discuss this and see what other, based on the conversation, what other suggestions we might do, or we might just consider this a moot point and we can discuss it again in January at our retreat for next year, since we are required annually to review our council rules. Councilmember McCluskey, you had your hands up.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think the council is really that far off the mark. I think what the council is saying is they need to reframe and regroup, maybe contemplate a little bit, but that's not quite ready for prime time. But maybe with another study session, we can wrap it up nicely with a bow. I think the contingency component to this is the timeline component and the redundancy. I see, for me, with my managerial and HR background, timelines are important, and it precludes procrastination. It takes away the emotion out of the issue and looks at the facts. It just gives us a nice check and balance component as to, was there communication? What was the reason? What's our situation on our council? Go forward, not go forward. And the other key component is, as Mr. Kaiser alluded to, after the 3 strikes, he's out. What is that? Is that going to be really complicated, or do we want to have a little more grace there before we go into that mucky muck of the council removal, which Councilmember Fleming says it sounds kind of arduous and process that could take up to 3 years. So if the council member only has a year left or 2 years left, do we even want to go that route? So there's a lot of questions to answer and consider, but at certain benchmarks along the way, council can come together, reframe, reflect, and do the process so that we can do the right thing at the end. Continue on as
Denise.
What?
I said you were muted your last few comments.
Oh, no wonder you guys were looking rather reflective. Okay, well, you won't hear the long story now. I just believe, from my managerial and HR background, timelines are, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing that reflective look on Kent Kill. Okay, got it. All right. Timelines are essential when you're talking about things that have a little emotional impact, can be hard decisions. I mean, it is a difficult decision to consider to replace a council member. No, doesn't matter what the reason is for. So at whatever it is, 60 days, 120 days, to have that grace of time to come together and reflect and do the right thing as to what's the reason, how did he communicate, how are we going to communicate back. And like when former Mayor Keel was there, that was something that I believe could have helped him out immensely to go forward with a certain process and a timeline for that. And Matt, Kaiser was indicating that the 3 strikes you're out was very complicated, as so did Councilmember Fleming. That is a very arduous and long process that could take up to 2 or 3 years. So that's also a consideration at the 60 or 120 day mark. I don't care to say, well, you know, what he or she only has 1 year left. Do you want to deal with it, or how do we want to go forward with it as well? So I do feel a reflection point and a jumping off into a certain direction is very important and strategic for our council to do at a certain point in time with extended absences.
Okay, are there any other comments at this time? Okay, we will take this back to the drawing board and review it, and we'll let you know what transpires. Just before we adjourn, I want to make mention, I failed to, during the council comments portion, failed to mention that you each had received the email copy of the letter to the AWC. That letter has been signed and will be forwarded on to AWC. Also, I'd like to remind all the council members, because we're going through a very rapid process with this CARES Act funding for our business and potential for citizens. Staff has been recording those sessions and forwards us the links to listen to those sessions. I want to encourage all of you to engage in that process, even if you're not able to attend the meetings, and to listen to those conversations that go on. So when we do have the discussion again at our council meeting, we are all on the same page and understand the basis for the recommendations that move forward for that funding decision that we do have to make here in the very near future. So with that, not seeing any additional comments or questions, I am going to adjourn this meeting. Good evening. Have a lovely evening.
Good night.